Wireless security history started back in 1997, and let's look at the turf war that started the Wi-Fi wars in this gangster analogy. And it all started with the WEP protocol, the Wired Equivalent Privacy WEP. Now WEP was a pretty big deal because it was the first wireless security protocol introduced in the original 802.11 standard. And this meant Homeboy's home setup, which was Microsoft Windows 95, given WEP came out in 97, which meant this setup could be upgraded to use wireless technology. And in 1999, a few years later, the first ever wireless router, then known as Access Point, was released to allow Homeboy to contact his homies using wireless technology. And an important technical keynote for this video and your exam is that wireless technology is part of the IEEE 802.11 standard. That's 802.11 standard. And an easy way to remember this is that WEP was the OG original gangster protocol for wireless technology 802.11. Yeah boy! That meant Homie no longer needed those Cat5e, E for elephant Ethernet cables, which was popular in the 90s. Because the wired equivalent, meaning no longer needing the wire in his trap house, was the whole point of WEP, to replace the wired equivalent. But Kino, a cable is usually always faster than wireless. I guess that's just the way it is. Now, some useful information for your CISSP and CCSP exams. As mentioned, the WEP protocol was aimed to provide wireless networks with the same level of security and privacy as traditional wired connections. As we go through this video, you will find they failed at this. Now let's move our history timeline on to when Homeboy was partying like it was 1999. And in this year, the IEEE standard was updated to 802.11b, B for Bravo, which offered faster speeds. And also Apple Mac was getting into the Wi-Fi game. In fact, the 1999 party was only just starting, because the WEP protocol was ratified in the Wi-Fi Alliance Standard in that same year. So they were obviously wrong when they said party over runs out of time, da, 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 as the Prince song goes. Now, it's worth noting that with WEP being part of the Wi-Fi Alliance, aka the mainstream, this was then known as WiFi-1, which was part of the 802.11b standard. Now, fast forward to the year 2001, which changed the Wi-Fi game. You see, significant flaws were discovered in the WEP protocol, demonstrating it could easily be cracked or hacked. And obviously this was not good publicity for the Wi-Fi Alliance, who officially retired the WEP protocol due to these vulnerabilities in 2004. Now, you may be wondering what actually technically killed WEP, and this will be explained in a moment because this is a proper gangster channel. And it would be great if you could like and subscribe if not already to help support this channel because it really does help, and it helps the Top G create more top content for you. Now back to the wireless gangsters video. Now, the way Homeboy's wireless setup was cracked was through vulnerabilities in the WEP protocol as mentioned, but what exactly were these vulnerabilities? Well, let's explain. WEP had some inherent major design flaws in its use of the RC4 stream cipher, which stands for Reversed Cipher 4, and the use of a 24-bit initialization vector IV. And the issue back then wasn't necessarily the cipher or the IV per se, but the way that it was used to generate the key stream, which used an algorithm like this, which was the IV plus the RC4 cipher, which equaled the key stream, which was then XORed with the original plaintext, which then created the ciphertext. Well, actually, if Homeboy was being honest, it was a bit more complicated than that. You see, the IV was seeded with a secret key, known as the Pre-Shared Secret Key, PSK. And this was then plussed with the RC4 cipher, which then generated the key stream, as you can see from the algorithm on your screen. Now, in terms of the actual attack itself, this was actually due to the initialization vector IV length, which was a 24-bit pseudo-random number. And any wireless gangster who understands a binary number system knows that 2 to the power of 24 has X amount of possible values, and this is where the flaw lied, because the IV was transmitted in clear text, along with the fact that after a certain period of times these numbers will likely repeat, and you can then break the code. Because the WEP protocol algorithm is very simple as shown on screen, and all the wireless gangster has to do is collect all the ciphertext to perform various statistical attacks, and this can be to recover the plaintext and the key PSK. And this can even be done in reverse using the same formula, e.g. generating a key stream and then XORing it with the plaintext to see the possible ciphertexts. You could say with more WEP frames came more WEP problems. But how exactly was a WEP problem solved? Well, let's continue our gangster Wi-Fi wars analogy. Continuing from 2001, when we know the WEP protocol was cracked by a gangster Wi-Fi cracker. You could say shots were fired, and in return the Wi-Fi Alliance had to return fire and released what was known as the WPA Wi-Fi Protected Access in 2003. Important technical keynote: WPA was an interim solution, an immediate response, aka shots fired, until the crucial necessary security bridge could be applied to WEP encryption. This would be 802.11i, I for India standard, which would later become WPA-2 as we'll discuss later in the video. But before WPA-2 could be released, there was various hardware compatibility issues that needed to be ironed out before this government-grade encryption could be widely adopted. And so in the meantime, one of the key security improvements that was implemented into WEP protocol in WPA was the TKIP, Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, as well as other security features like better key management, dynamic not static IVs, message integrity checks, and the supported 802.1x authentication framework. But key CISSP, CCSP exam tip, do not get too hung up on these improvements because this was historic and is no longer relevant today, but just at a very high level. WPA still used the WEP RC4 cipher, but added some improvements such as better key management and dynamic keys and IVs rather than static, as well as various integrity and authentication checks. In other words, you can think of Wi-Fi Protected Access WPA as wide equivalent privacy WEP on steroids. But even these steroids were not enough to stop the Wi-Fi wars, as again WPA would be cracked by the wireless gangster in 2008. But important technical keynote, we are fast forwarding a little bit in time because WPA-2, the much anticipated 802.11i for India standard, was released in 2004, but in order to understand the KRACK attack, yes, that's KRACK with a K, which was a literal attack on the WPA-2 standard, which will be explained a little later. But first we need to understand the bullet that cracked WPA, which actually went through WEP and has an indirect reference to WPA-2. But WPA was cracked in a few different ways. Primarily, it was through offline password guessing attacks after capturing authentication data, which happened through the four-way handshake. And through this four-way handshake is how a session key was negotiated. And it is here where the attack, also known as cracking, occurs, because a cracker, also known as a hacker, can passively sniff the airwaves to capture this four-way handshake. And within that exchange is a very useful piece of information for the cracker known as the session key. And just in case if the cracker missed this exchange, the cracker can often speed this up by sending what is known as deauthentication packets to a connected device, forcing it to disconnect and reconnect, which again generates a fresh handshake to capture. Important technical keynote, the session key is derived from a hash of the network password, meaning the password is not, I repeat, not sent in clear text over the network. Instead, only the hash is sent over the network. And in WPA and WPA2 personal, this session key is made up from passphrase and the network name SSID combined. Later in the video we will talk about WPA2 personal, but for now this is the important thing to remember. So in terms of the attack, the captured handshake itself does not contain the password, but it contains all the necessary ingredients to test a password guess offline. To crack the password offline, an attacker could use a tool like KRACK, NG, or Hashcat to run millions of potential passwords from a dictionary file, or generate combinations through brute force attacks against the captured data. It's worth noting that this first major security flaw in WPA protocol, specifically the wpa-tkip, was demonstrated by security researchers in November 2008. That was 4 years after the WPA-2 Wi-Fi Protected Access 2 was released. This meant some of the security flaws inherent in WPA as the interim solution would be present in WPA-2, which will be explained in a moment, but ultimately for now, WPA-2 was released in 2004 after much anticipation. And WPA-2 did not disappoint because it replaced the TKIP protocol with AES Advanced Encryption Standard. And what's more, WPA2 mandated the use of counter mode with Cipher Blockchaining Message Authentication Code Protocol (CCMP) alongside the AES to make it that extra bit secure. In other words, WPA2 was more bulletproof than WPA because it does not use the RC4 cipher or its initialization vector IV that was a common flaw in WEP. And by this point in history, WEP was now obsolete. Although, technical caveat, WPA2 PSK still remained vulnerable to offline attacks, so was not completely bulletproof. But generally, WPA2 was much more secure than WPA and WEP combined. And just to briefly clarify the two modes of WPA2, which is WPA2 Personal, which uses a single pre-shared key PSK, which is great for home or small offices because the same password is used for everyone. Whereas in WPA2 Enterprise, each device or user authenticates individually with unique credentials, e.g. username and passwords, or digital certificates. And as the mode name suggests, this is generally used by enterprises, which are medium or large organizations that need a central server to manage all user access. And later, in 2017, both these WPA2 modes were found to be vulnerable to an attack known as the KRACK attack. Yes, that's KRACK, but with a K for kangaroo. And KRACK stood for Key Reinstallation Attack. Important technical keynote, the KRACK attack did not reveal the Wi-Fi network's password. Instead, it was more like a man-in-the-middle attack, or as this analogy goes, a gangster in the middle. And the attack targeted a flaw in the WPA2's protocol key management, aka the four-way handshake explained earlier. However, the KRACK attack did not, I repeat, did not break the AES-CCMP encryption algorithm itself. It focused on the four-way handshake vulnerability and weakness rather than the AES-CCMP, which still remains robust at a military-grade level. AKA AES-CCMP remains bulletproof. Now, I won't go into all the mathematics of CCMP because it's very complicated and it's proper geeks off the street stuff, but if you like this video, I'll look to make a future video on this if you are interested. But for the purposes of this gangster video, just remember AES-CCMP is proper strong stuff. So strong that if a cracker was to sniff AES-CCMP, they would be as high as wireless airwaves. Yee boy! And last but not least, I want to talk about the Wi-Fi Protected Access 3, WPA3. Now, WPA3 improved WPA2 in a few different ways. The first was a security enhancement on the encryption, the AES-CCMP, which you can think of as some additional steroids. This was known as AES in Galois counter mode. That's Galois for a G. G for gangster. Oh yeah. And I won't go into the geeks of the street maths for this, but this is known as AES-GCMP as an abbreviation as shown on the screen. And if you would like to see a separate video on the maths of this, please be sure to like this video so that I know that you are interested in such topic. But for the purposes of this gangster video, just remember that G stands for GCMP, which made AES-CCMP more secure. AKA G for Galois, G for gangster. WPA3 also replaced the WPA2 PSK pre-shared key with something known as SAE, Simultaneous Authentication of Equals, which was essentially a huge security upgrade that provided stronger authentication. And so, to this day, at the time of the video, WPA3 remains the most strongest option in terms of the Wi-Fi protected access protocols, and you can think of WPA3 as essentially ending the Wi-Fi wars. If you enjoyed and found this Wi-Fi Wars gangster video informative, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. As to all my fellow gangsters and geeks from the streets, I cannot reiterate how important even a simple like, yet alone subscribe, is to support this new channel's growth. It really does help. And it also helps the top G know that you are enjoying this top content so that I can continue making more and more content like this for your entertainment and information.